the safeguarding question might include, what would you consider to ensure a person is safeguarded? Or you might be given a case study including a safeguarding situation, and you'll be asked to think about what you'd do in that scenario. So the general mindset just to have that I wanted to point out before we got into this was that as social workers we are expected to have safeguarding on our minds all the time, and that means that we're always risk assessing and need to be alert to signs of abuse and neglect. This doesn't mean that that doesn't sort of tell us exactly how we will act on it, but it just means that it's in our minds, not just at the concern raising stage. Safeguarding is about people having the right to live free from abuse and neglect. So I'd be telling the panel that I'm aware of that, but also the specifics, including knowledge of Section 42 of the Care Act. Then in terms of the practical side, what I would do is I'd gather information about the safeguarding concern, and that would involve speaking to the person to find out what their desired outcomes are of the risk at hand, to help inform any decisions made. You need to make sure the person is aware of the risk and the source of the risks. Obviously, we need to assume capacity in line with the Mental Capacity Act, but we also need to have it in our minds, so we're thinking about whether the person can consent to the safeguarding process. It might be that you, in the case study, if that's what you're given, there might be someone with cognitive impairment, and that might be a lead into the panel looking to think, are you going to pick up on that? The local authority must arrange for independent advocacy where the adult has substantial difficulty being involved within the process and there is no other suitable person to represent and support them. The local authority also needs to take action to ensure the immediate safety of the person at risk or other persons at risk. So we need to be thinking about that. In the case study, there might be something that leans you towards recognising that you need to take a practical step to ensure the person's safety. And that might be by calling the police or getting urgent medical care. You need to think about, does a crime need to be reported? And all the time thinking about consent. I would suggest that if that's a part that you don't know much about, because the record keeping side is really important with safeguarding. So if you're doing any case notes, they need to be written within 24 hours usually, but each local authority might have their own protocol with this and what they expect. So it might be worth checking that out in the before the interview and finding out. You need to include as much information as possible and what you've done to minimise the risks. You need to document the incident and any actions or decisions that you make. Another important element is information sharing. So you need to make sure that key people are informed. So the CQC might need to be informed if it's a care home. The Office of the Public Guardian might need to be informed if there's a problem with lasting power of attorney, things like that. But this part really depends on what might come up in the case study, if that's what you've been given in this question. But if they're asking for a situation you've previously been involved with, you need to be thinking about a good example for this safeguarding question. You'll be needing to provide support to the person raising the concern. This might be an individual you're involved in supporting, or a family member or another professional, and making sure they're informed. This is the same thing as before really. You need to look at the local safeguarding procedure for the council you're applying for. This is really important, this next bit. You need to consider the key principles informing safeguarding work. They are statutory, so we have to consider them. I've actually been asked specifically a question on this, and I basically had to talk about these principles, and I was glad that I knew them off by heart. So the first one is empowerment, people being supported and encouraged to make their own decisions. Informed consent, thinking about, has the person got capacity, views of the person, and do they need an advocate? Prevention, it's better to take action before harm occurs. Proportionality, we need to take the least intrusive response to risk presented. Protection, support and representation for those most in need. partnership, local solutions to working with communities, and accountability and transparency and safeguarding and record keeping. I would advise that you look those up properly online and just get them clear in your head. So just to note, we should try and gain consent before we undertake any safeguarding procedures. However, there is a duty to protect those from serious harm or protect the public. So if an adult with care and support needs is at risk of serious harm and they're unable to protect themselves, consent can be overridden. So that's something to have in your head for this question, because you might be asked something that throws you off. Think we might not have any legal powers of entry under the Care Act, but do we need to use other means to gain access? So that might be the police powers. Is the person being coerced? Might be something to think about. If they have capacity but they're under an undue influence or they're incapable of acting on the decision, inherent jurisdiction can be considered. So that's a piece of legislation that sits outside of the Care Act. I don't think that you'll have to know something like that within this question, but sometimes just showing that you're aware of the intricacies in the law can show that you're really knowledgeable and interested. So the last thing is the Making Safeguarding Personal Guidance is really important. This guidance found that people reported that sometimes safeguarding has made people's lives worse by social work intervention, as it resulted in no real outcomes for them. So that was where people had not really, they were more focused on meeting the needs of the local authority than the person. So it was very procedural. And now the main emphasis needs to be on what's really important for that individual. What outcomes do they want? And that's really important. I think if you read this, you get a really good understanding of how to answer the whole safeguarding question.